Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my dining room. So today I'd like to show you a little bit of my coin collection. Okay, I don't have a particularly large coin collection, and this of course is going to get into chemistry. So right over here I have a few vintage coins. The first one up on top is a 1940 wheat penny. So this is a penny, very much like you're used to. It's a bit of a collectible, so the value is a little bit higher than face value if you find the right collector. But in general, it's a penny. What makes it a wheat penny, of course, is the backside, which I suspect the camera will not be getting a particularly good image of. Anyways, these, of course, are made of copper. Now, actually, I shouldn't say of course, because the modern penny is actually not made of copper. If you get one that's been minted since the mid-1980s, it's actually made of zinc with a thin copper coating. The reason ends up being is that the value of copper is high enough and the value of a cent is low enough that a penny is actually worth less than the copper that would be taken to make the penny. Yeah, okay, that's awkward, but it's actually not so awkward. Back in the day, the classic coins were not what we use now. Now we use fiat currency. Fiat currency is this piece of money, whatever it is, has a value that's this much because we said so. We being usually organizations such as the United States government or whatever government issued the particular coin. Now, before that, though, the value of the coin was actually the value of the coin, the value of the metal contained within it. So a copper penny could be the value of the copper within it. Now, of course, there would be regulations, etc. And it was like, yes, this has this value, and that would lead to all kinds of interesting situations like, hey, I'll go buy a bunch of gold coins and then ship them someplace else where gold's more important, or more valuable, I should say. And yeah, this could be a mess. But this also meant that as long as the coin was in good condition, it held its worth even if you were away from the particular government that issued it. You would weigh it and, hey, if I know it's this much material and this purity, hey, we're good to go. And that was the norm. Of course, the coins themselves were made to assure that their weight was their weight and their purity was their purity. Now, next up, I have a 1923 silver dollar. Of course, a dollar is worth a lot less now than it used to be. Inflation is a thing, and this has been nearly 100 years since this was minted. But in 1923, this guy had a dollar worth of silver in it. Actually quite large. Of course, a dollar would buy a lot more. So the current face value is a lot less than what it is worth for the value of the silver. But once again, in 1923, this would have been worth its weight in silver quite literally. And the interesting note on silver is it's actually a very common coinage metal. The Latin for silver, which I am not going to try and pronounce, but I will display at some point, is actually basically the Latin word for money, or is derived very closely to that. Silver was such a common currency. It's not as valuable as gold. The problem with using gold would simply be that if you wanted a reasonably small denomination coin, well, that would be really small. And so you wanted a less precious metal. Not to mention silver is nice and tough. Gold is a little bit more easily beat up, but mostly a tiny denomination would be a tiny coin. Whereas we can get something down to a dollar, which is still a lot of silver going on, because once again, the dollar 100 years ago was worth a lot more than it is today. Now, the next piece I have is a 1901 gold $10 coin. So this is a smaller coin, but a higher denomination because we've switched to a more precious metal. Typically, there was about a 20-to-1 ratio for these guys back kind of, Middle Ages, moving on up into more modern time periods. I'm not going to be able to, go exactly as to the ratios of these guys. But you can notice there's definitely a marked difference. He's smaller, but a higher denomination. And of course the back of this. And I suspect the protective coating is going to not play well with the camera. So I do apologize on that. Okay, so I have the coins here. And you will notice something that if you, like me, are a chemist, you will notice something very specific about the way I have these ordered. Yes, I'm that ornery to do this. This is the way they are arranged on the periodic table. If you look on the periodic table, you will find copper directly above silver, directly above gold. And this is not an accident. Remember what happens with elements on the periodic table when they are in groups or vertically aligned. They have similar chemistries. And these three elements are known as the coinage metals because they're used in coins. Typically, through antiquity, most coins were silver. Once again, silver was literally Latin for money. Were made of these three elements or alloys thereof. Electrum, which is one of the most common ones in antiquity, would be an alloy of silver and gold. Bronze, of course, would be used, brass, etc. And of course, alloys that were not necessarily on the up and up, because a great way of cheating would be to have, say, some silver and then mix in some other elements so that the value of the metal was less than what you actually put into it, and thus you could do some defrauding. But these guys were some of our earliest choices for coinage, and there's a couple of really good reasons why, and it has to do with their chemistry. When we look at metals, there's one way of organizing them that you will see quite often. It's usually, in general chemistry textbooks, it's usually kind of 3/4 way to the end. And that is an activity series. We have metals that we call active metals. These metals, it's very easy to extract an electron from them. They're relatively decent reducing agents. Think things like sodium and potassium. Now, on the other end, we have noble metals. And those are ones that's very hard to extract an electron, and if you have the ionic form of them, they like to get their electron back. Those can be rather oxidizing when they're in their ionic form. Now, why do we care? Well, a couple of features. Most notably, if you have a relatively noble metal, which obviously gold is a classic noble metal. Copper, usually we wouldn't call it a noble metal, but it's getting there. They're not going to corrode much. They're going to stay nice and shiny, and humans, well, we like shiny. So, hey, it's gold, it's shiny, it's silver, it's shiny. This guy's in plastic, so he hasn't tarnished too much. The copper would have been a lot shinier back when it was minted. Obviously, this guy is 80 years old this year, so, you know, it's had a little bit of time to tarnish. And this then leads us to some other interesting features. The other reason these were used quite often as coins is in antiquity, these were some of the first materials actually used as metals. So over here, I have a piece of copper. This is a copper nugget dug out of the ground in Michigan. There are certain parts of Michigan, I believe this came from the Keweenaw Peninsula, that have large copper deposits. And the coinage metals can be found in nugget form as an actual metal, not as an ore. If I dig up iron from the ground, I'm going to get iron oxide. I'm not going to get metallic iron, at least not naturally occurring. But copper, I can get that in its metallic form. And so primitive societies would be able to acquire the copper in its metallic form and do metalworking with it. It's a lot easier to work a metal than it is actually to smelt the metal and refine it from its ore into its constituent metal and then the slag, which is all the other stuff that's not turning into the metal. So when looking at coins, it's an interesting history and an application of chemistry that has affected human culture and civilization for as long as we've been looking at metals and going, ooh, shiny, I want some. So with that said, have a wonderful day. Okay, so the original plans for this talk, I was going to talk about modern bullion coins, but I couldn't actually get mine out, but I finally was able to get them out. I was literally stuck in its case. The larger of the two came in a decorative case. Anyways, so one of the key features of coins throughout history has been really an easier way of weighing your currency or weighing out your metal. So if you think about, say, the gold rush stories, you know, up in the Yukon, etc., where miners would pay for things with volumes of gold dust or weights of gold dust. That's really inconvenient. So to make it more convenient, you want to put them into some kind of uniform sized container or melt them into some kind of glob that's of uniform size and then have some security features to assure that it really is what it is. And so that's actually what coins are. Now, they still make these, or these are still produced. And here I have two American eagles. I have a silver eagle and a gold eagle. These are not coins in the terms of having a denomination. These don't have a value. So unlike my silver dollar or my gold $10 coin, these don't have a actual, like, this is worth this many dollars. This is simply this many grams of silver or gold. And so these actually make nice little graduation gifts. So the goal here is, hey, you've got your piece of metal. It is heavily engraved, so it would be hard to make a piece of metal like it. You'll notice there's a ribbing on the outside, so you can't shave it down, at least not easily. I think, yeah, they're both the same way. And thus, it's a uniform piece of metal that then could be traded, sold, etc. Of course, nowadays, these are really much more of just kind of a collector's piece. These guys are a classic graduation gift. The gold ones are a little bit pricey for a graduation gift, and a little pricey and a little bit useless. They're just shiny. But the silver ones, well, they're still useless. But they're a nice little graduation gift kind of thing, or, any other, like, I want to get you something weird and shiny that's not too horribly expensive, but it's a little bit pricey. So yeah, this has actually been a common approach. And being a metal, we can melt these down quite easily. We can work with them. We can stamp them. The forging process for these guys, or I shouldn't say forging. It's not really a forging process, but the way you make a coin ends up taking the metal you have to start with, and then you have a harder metal that squishes it. And of course, that's the classic property of metals, is you can squish them into a new shape. Whereas if this was a non-metal, you would simply pulverize it. Okay, so that was the aside that I wanted to do. There's a whole gigantic, like 3 or 4 minutes of just me fighting with this thing that's on the cutting room floor, then I gave up. But anyways, so for this time, really, have a wonderful day.